Buenos días.
Buenos días.
¿Cómo están?
Muy bien.
Good. So I'm going to talk today about the power of the community, particularly in disasters. Quick overview, we live in Puerto Rico, and I believe that communities are as powerful as the people who empower them. And we support the Puerto Rico community through our co-working space, which my wife runs, Piloto 151, a coding academy, and our digital policy consulting firm. Now, we support and empower the community through this space. People like you here today, people with hues of green in their GitHub profiles, people with respected reputations in Stack Overflow and Hacker News, open source contributors, those of you who keep active blogs or have a large social following, leaders and collaborators like you here today, through events and workshops and hackathons and co-working spaces, we cultivate and accelerate innovation through increased collaboration and the exchange of information and ideas. And we collaborated with Code for America, and we have members that used to work with me that are serving at the US Digital Service. And this community has been really helpful, particularly supporting Puerto Rico during disasters. So that's Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria. That is hell on earth. And 17 days after Maria, when we were still, most of the city was still without power, most of Puerto Rico was still without power, estimates today range that we've had as many as 4,600 deaths. Now, that is 9/11 and Katrina combined almost. Let that sink in. 17 days after Maria, my friend and mentor and supporter, someone who has empowered all the efforts that I've done in the community, Jorge Rodriguez, goes on a reconnaissance trip to the west of the island. He had a convoy of 4 trucks and a helicopter, and his mission was threefold. He was going to survey roads to see what was accessible, he was going to interview hospitals and mayors to get a list of needs, and he was going to deliver some supplies. After the second town, he's on his way to the third, and he gets pulled over by the vice mayor of the town, and he brings over a citizen. Her name is Frances, and she approaches Jorge and she says, "My son Diego suffers from a unique condition called propionic acidemia. He's the only one in Puerto Rico that has it, and I am out of his medication." She had gone to the San Juan Medical Center, and they said that they were out of supplies. And if Diego doesn't get his dosage by tomorrow morning, he would most probably die. Now, Jorge was on his way to the third town. The helicopter was already on its way there. He was unable to reach it via satellite phone. So she tells Frances and the vice mayor, "You're going to go to Frances's house, you're going to gather all of your belongings, and get ready to leave Puerto Rico as soon as possible. I'll be in touch." Jorge goes to the next town, rendezvous with the helicopter, and that's Jorge pointing, giving directions. And he says, "We're going to find some of this medication." Through networks and the access of friends of Facebook friend requests, they actually find a case of the medicine. The chopper picks up Frances at her house. They go to the San Juan Medical Center. Diego's given his dosage. And the next day, Frances, still nervous about the situation in Puerto Rico, through networks and friends of friends, Jorge finds her a private plane to go to Miami, and by 9:30 p.m. the following day, she's in Orlando with her family, and Diego has been living a normal life. That is one of 137 lives that Jorge would save in what became the Diego Relief Project. So 4,600 minus 137 thanks to Jorge. Now, I owe a lot to Jorge. He invested equity-free in my first startup. He only asked that I pay it forward. And he sets a really high bar. He introduced me to my wife, Sophia. And so together, we pay it forward through the ecosystem and the community that we've built. And through those events that we hold, we bring the most talented people to Puerto Rico to help spread the word on open data and the impact of communities. And one of the people that we brought, many people may know this guy, Maxim Perchersky. And Maxim was our fellow in Puerto Rico in 2014, and I told Max to give a talk on open data. And Hurricane Irma was approaching that week, and I told Max, listen, you're not going to give a talk on open data. We're going to open up some data. Now, the government had already released data on shelters and hospitals, and they had created a couple of apps, but I felt that we needed flood layer information. So Maxim connected to the FEMA Geo server, which was actually down half the time. So he tried extraction in 2 languages and failed. He downloaded 12 gigabytes of flood zone files, opened QGIS, loaded it into RAM, filtered down to Puerto Rico, figured out flood zone data, filtered out 500-year floods, hosted it and added it to the map and uploaded it. It was 36 hours of intense work, and we open sourced it and made it available, and then it was displayed. We could see shelters that were actually located in flood zones. So having access to community leaders like Maxim, that's the difference between having, a guy like Steph Curry go up for a rebound versus J.R. Smith. It's important to have access to these type of talented people. And that type of talent was also the talent that we had forming the Maria Tech Brigade. Former Code for America captain Froilán Irizarry, who may be in the audience today, and current USDS employee Alberto Colón, who was also a brigade captain now at the USDS. These guys in DC helped the response when nobody knew what was happening in Puerto Rico, and there's over 4 million Puerto Ricans in the States. They have family members, they could not reach them. So the Maria Tech Brigade created a project called Snail Check. They had people that were participating in the relief effort send them information about people they had interacted with so they could add them to the Google Person Finder. And they had a number of volunteers entering names one by one until Google, through a friend of ours, also from Puerto Rico, Miguel Rios, got access to an API key so that we could upload bulk files. We ended up uploading about 11,000 registrations, and people were actually calling and reaching out to the brigade saying thank you because they had figured out that their loved ones were actually safe. The brigade did a lot of other great work. The important thing about the work that all these communities do is that the impact of networks and tech communities is greater than the old hierarchy model that supported NGOs before it. I think it's allowing for the creation of a new generation of institutions, transparent by design, and these institutions will be as powerful as the people who empower them. We have projects such as Off-Grid Relief that has installed over 50 solar panels around the island and is helping build microgrids, and we're working on another project on parametric hurricane insurance that can automate payments based on certain conditions being met. And leading organizations today that are exploring how they can change their mission to find ways to create more value than what they take in, they should just look at supporting civic tech communities. It's really the best way to do this. And if well organized and empowered, these communities can definitely save lives in times of crisis. Thank you.
Hello, Giancarlo, thank you so much for telling your story. It's truly inspiring. I have the pleasure of being here with you today in order to introduce 3 people who became heroes in their communities and are heroes last year when disasters struck and hurricanes tore across the United States. These hurricanes tore apart families, they tore apart homes, and they tore apart communities. Today happens to be the first day of hurricane season. The stories you're about to hear are stories of brigades and community partners and local government that worked with brigades in order to create tools that helped real people in real times of need and provided real relief to people when they were in their worst times. I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Reichman, co-organizer of SketchCity, a Code for America brigade in Houston, Texas, Julie Kramer, the co-captain of Code for Miami, and Natalie Bednarz, the digital communications coordinator for the city of Orlando, who worked with Code for Orlando during Hurricane Irma.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Reichman, and I live in Houston, Texas. Hurricane Harvey caught us by surprise, and it was completely and utterly overwhelming. Over 50 inches of rain fell. I mean, that's an overwhelming amount of rain just in a couple of days. It overwhelmed our first responders. 911 was busy, and neighbors were hopping in boats rescuing one another. It overwhelmed our shelters. These people needed a place to go, and they would fill up as soon as they opened. We had hundreds of shelters throughout the city. It overwhelmed our social services workers. Caseloads went up tenfold. And it overwhelmed our recovery efforts. It's slow, it's 9 months later, and we're just starting to get off the ground in terms of rebuilding our communities. Almost everybody in our brigade was okay, but almost everybody knows somebody who lost everything. When the rain stopped and we checked in with one another, some of us were in boats, some of us were volunteering at shelters, and we were seeing opportunities where technology could make a real impact. So we got to work. We crowdsourced up-to-the-minute data about needs in shelters, and we built text bots and maps to help over 16,000 people find a shelter. We helped connect over 23,000 people with volunteers to muck and gut out their homes after the water had damaged it. And we posted up in the Emergency Operations Center and worked side by side with the official response. We got a ton of new ideas from that experience as well, including a website that helped the city of Houston get millions in additional FEMA reimbursements. Most of all, we had a great crew of hundreds of technologists, first responders, policy wonks, product managers, marketers, and journalists who shipped new products and new features every single day during the disaster and its aftermath. Hurricane Harvey was 9 months ago, and Houston is in the very early stages of rebuilding. If anything, it pulled back the curtain to show how tech volunteers can be an important part of the community response.
Hello, my name is Julie Kramer and I live in Miami. In September of 2017, I worked with over 700 volunteers in Florida and across the nation to make shelter information available for people who are in the path of Hurricane Irma. During times of crisis, the amount of information can be overwhelming and a lot of times inaccurate. We wanted to gather shelter information into one place, be able to verify it, and make it available to be consumed by users. 5 days before Irma hit landfall, a group of volunteers from different brigades were having a conversation about how we could have the most impact. The Houston Brigade's SketchCity was in this conversation and gave us a clone of the shelter application they had used during Hurricane Harvey just a few weeks prior. This was a great start for us. Our network was able to use this technology and build upon it. Some of the challenges we faced were that because the storm was so big, literally wider than the state itself, the path was unclear. So we had to gather information for all 67 counties in Florida. Thankfully, Code for Orlando and numerous other volunteers were able to get the initial data entry done before the storm hit. It was really not an easy task to get that data entered. To no one's surprise, it was pretty difficult getting a bunch of software developers psyched up for data entry. Another challenge was that as the storm came closer, people started moving into the shelters and the shelters started getting full. And the thought that we were publishing data that might not be totally accurate occurred to us for the first time. We decided that the only thing that we could do to make sure their data was accurate was to pick up the phone and start calling the counties. Let me tell you, the only thing harder than getting software developers to do than data entry is talking on the phone. The process of calling shelters and keeping track of this process became really tedious, but thankfully help was on the way. One of our developers wrote a web scraper that would detect changes on all the county websites and publish this information to a dedicated Slack channel. So now every time that information changed, we would automatically be notified, eliminating the need to call the shelters, and this was a huge breakthrough for us. It occurred to some of our volunteers that a map pinpointing the locations of the shelters would be helpful, so they built it. It also occurred to one of our volunteers that it would be easier for people to on the move to text their location to a chat bot and find a shelter, so he built it. It was amazing to see these two projects come together that were built on top of the original technology from Houston, all serving the same purpose. It also became apparent that a central location was needed for all this information, so one of our software developers spun up irmaresponse.org, which brought all the tools together into one place, including the shelter map, the chatbot, and the shelter data collection tool. All of this was possible not only because of our volunteers, but because of Slack. It made it possible for 700 volunteers to come together and actually produce something of value rather than just producing chaos. It made onboarding easy, it made organizing projects easy too. It allowed people to leave and come back when they were able to, and it allowed us to give and receive feedback and allowed for quick consensus building. And lastly, it brought together a community that I'm really proud to have been a part of. Thank you.
Emergencies suck, especially when your job is emergency response and you have to deal with the logistics of whatever's coming before, during, and after. You can prepare all you want, but you never truly know what will happen, what work you will be faced with, and what help you will need. In June 2016, on Saturday, I was with my dog at the park, and on Sunday, I was creating web pages telling the world who died during the Pulse nightclub shooting. That day, all the years of work Mayor Buddy Dyer and Orlando City employees did to secure and cultivate local partnerships helped us come out of a tragedy with more purpose, love, and faith in humanity. It takes time and real face-to-face interactions to create strong partnerships, and I am proud of those relationships we built and how those bonds revealed themselves during such a dark time. I saw our brigade, Code for Orlando, stand by us, whether just to listen or assist in efforts. Compassion met action. Many people in the community came together with our brigade. They took time out of their lives to brainstorm and develop tools for other cities needing to respond to tragedies like ours. Preparation like having those tools or ideas developed with our brigade can mean less chaos and saving lives. That's why the City of Orlando takes that extra step and works hard to create and maintain those critical partnerships for those what-if situations. We are always training and preparing for what might come our way, but we know that at the end of the day, we are at each other's mercies. And by working together, we can endure and bounce back. Last year, before Hurricane Irma hit, we waited and waited for the county to release shelter information. We as a city received that information at the same time as everyone else. We did our best to push out that information out, but we ran into snags. At times like this, when you're stuck in a cement bunker surrounded by a flurry of activity, transcribing content from a PDF and pushing it out to your citizens can be tedious, but more so overwhelming. That day, Code for Orlando took action by joining the effort started in Houston. They rolled up their sleeves, took those PDFs and graphics made by the county, and entered the information so it was more digestible and searchable. And as influencers in their communities, they pushed out this critical information to their networks. They became an extension of our communication efforts and of our city team. You can't always control things like critical information being released in inaccessible formats, but you can be prepared. You can have those partnerships in place. They are there on standby to help when you need to delegate, vent, or discover new ideas quickly. Like I said, emergencies suck, but they can suck a little less if we work together and try to find those pain points of our community and try to fix them. Little by little, we are making things better because of partnerships, because of keeping our minds open, because it's our job. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I think that they're really inspiring, and it gives us a picture into what things were like in real time as we were dealing with these tragedies. I have a few questions that I think that we'd all be interested in hearing your responses to. So Jeff, I'll start out with you. I think that when you came together in Houston, you were able to react so quickly and pull together tools in such a timely manner. And we'd love to know, what was it that gave you the ability to do things so quickly at that time?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, Houston is a really big city, so we have a lot of very talented people. On top of that, our brigade has been active for about 6 years, so we've been going through the process of community building for quite a while, and our community is filled with a diverse group of people from all different walks of life and all different types of jobs, including government. And the teams that have formed through hackathons and hack nights really self-assembled in the face of a disaster. So people who were used to working together, used to delivering products, used to seeing it get used, had no problems just self-assembling and making something happen. So I see it like a high-stakes hackathon where the outcomes really matter. And I think that a lot of our community saw it that way as well.
Awesome, thank you. Julie, I'd like to ask you, what is the biggest lesson that you feel that you learned and Code for Miami learned after responding to Hurricane Irma?
Yeah, so I think that it's a lot easier to do something when you're not starting from scratch, right? You're starting with a network, you're starting with supportive people. So having the support of Houston to start out with was really essential for everything that we did. It really got us going, it gave us a jumping off point. And then I think as our network started going, it allowed for people to also jump in once they saw what we were working on. We already had projects going on, and because we were able to communicate that, people were able to jump in more easily. I also learned that I think we have a real problem with educating the public during crisis. In Florida, for whatever reason, people thought that they were safer getting on the road and fleeing from the storm rather than staying put and kind of sheltering and putting on shutters and preparing themselves. So I think that we need to do a lot better as far as education goes.
Great, thank you. And Natalie, I'd like to ask you from a city perspective, there's so much going on in times of crisis and so much information spreading and sometimes misinformation. So what was that process like for you and how did you handle it?
Well, yes, it's crazy when you're in the Emergency Operations Center, and Irma gave us some great teaching moments. You're working with different jurisdictions, and sometimes they give information in PDFs, which is not the most ideal format. But it was a great moment to realize that we need to talk to our partners in government and say that this is not going to work anymore, and try to bring everyone to the table and talk about it and figure out what's the best way to get this information out to our brigades and to our citizens. Another very interesting thing that happened was that I was part of the Irma Response Slack channel, and on the left side of my screen, I'm putting out shelter information and working with people through social media, trying to answer questions, and then on the right-hand side, backstory, there was a random county sheriff who decided to announce that they would arrest illegal aliens coming to shelters. No comment. But someone in the Irma Response Slack channel said it was Orlando. So here I am trying to get information out, but I'm also trying to figure out how to quell misinformation, because we want people to go to shelters and not be afraid that they're going to get arrested. At that time, it was a great teaching moment of how important those partnerships are beforehand, because I knew my brigade, I trust my brigade with everything I have, and they trust me. So I knew that they had my back in making sure that that information didn't go any forward, and that they could also help with saying this is not true. But it's definitely one of those crazy things when people come en masse and try to help, but sometimes they don't always help. So knowing the core people who you're working with is very important.
Yeah, that's a great lesson learned. Well, thank you so much again for sharing your stories. I think this has been so informative for everybody. So thanks.
Thank you.